The forest was thick with the scent of damp earth, a narrow path, worn smooth by the passage of countless feet, human and animal alike, cut through the dense undergrowth, weaving between towering trees that blocked out much of the light. It was a world of shadow and quiet. In the stillness, you could hear everything. The murmur of wind through leaves, the distant rustle of a deer in the underbrush, the occasional snap of a twig, and always, always, the song of the forest's smallest creatures. For years, this forest had been a sanctuary, a place where the animals, frogs, birds. It was an ancient place, where the earth had not yet been forced to yield to the will of humankind. But that had begun to change. Over the last several months, strange sounds had begun to ripple through the forest, sounds that weren't of the animals. They were harsh, mechanical. The deep roar of an engine, the whine of metal scraping against stone. And in the middle of all of it, the subtle hum of a distant presence that never fully disappeared. The frogs had been the first to notice. Their chorus, once loud and insistent, had gradually faded, retreating further into the heart of the sanctuary. The birds too had started to behave oddly. Their calls, once clear and piercing, grew disjointed, cut short, as if disturbed by some unseen force. The wind carried with it a constant low murmur, as if the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting. One evening, as dusk fell thick and heavy across the landscape, the sounds grew louder. The hum, once distant, had grown close enough to vibrate the ground beneath one's feet. The animals were becoming restless. In the tall grass near the edge of the forest, the frogs croaked in panicked bursts, then fell silent only to repeat the cycle. The birds flitted nervously from tree to tree, never staying in one place for too long. Even the air seemed to tremble with an unseen pressure. A lone figure emerged from the edge of the trees, a human. She was not the first to step into this sanctuary, but she was the first to be so determined, so calm in her steps. Dressed in rugged boots and a weathered jacket, she appeared as if she belonged in the woods. Her eyes, narrowed with concentration, scanned the area around her. She had come to find answers. There had been talk, rumors, that machines were pushing closer, creeping toward the sanctuary. A road, they said. And then, perhaps, buildings. The forest's edges were thinning. Something was coming. The land had begun to change. As she moved deeper, the forest around her seemed to grow quieter, as if the very trees were leaning in to listen. The once vibrant chorus of frogs had fallen silent, and the birds only flitted from branch to branch without making a sound. She stopped for a moment, her boots pressed into the wet earth. She could feel the tension, the quiet, the anticipation. A sudden rustling from the underbrush broke the silence. A flash of movement. She froze, heart racing. A fox, its fur glinting in the fading light, emerged from the trees. The creature's eyes locked onto hers for a long, tense moment, then it darted off into the shadows. Her breath came faster. The forest was uneasy. Moving cautiously forward, she felt a subtle shift in the air. The hum had grown louder, closer. She was near the edge now. She could see the faint outline of something ahead, but the trees were too thick to make out anything clear. She moved forward, her steps deliberate, testing each one as though the ground beneath her might betray her. The hum was almost deafening now, pulsing through the earth, rattling her bones. And then she saw it. The concrete. A large gray slab of it stretched out ahead, disrupting the forest's organic curve. The edge of the land had been marked with a scar, a slice through the earth, where bulldozers and other machines had torn through the landscape to make room for something. She could see tracks, deep indentations in the soft soil, as if the forest had been pushed back. Her pulse quickened. The forest was fighting back. She could feel it in the air, but it was too late. The machines were already here. But it wasn't just the machines that made the forest tremble. Something else was stirring, something far deeper in the woods. Her eyes flicked toward the edge of the concrete scar, where the trees grew thick again. The sound of something moving slowly, carefully came from that direction. She couldn't see what it was, but the movement was deliberate. The air shifted as though the forest itself were bracing. Her heart thundered in her chest. The frogs, the birds, they had all been warning her. She began to move again, faster now, drawn by some unseen force, by the deep pull of instinct. As she neared the edge of the concrete scar, the sounds grew louder, rustling, creaking, and then an eerie, high-pitched whistle that sent a chill through her. The wind shifted, gusting suddenly through the trees. Out of the shadows, a shadow emerged. Not the usual creatures she expected, but something unfamiliar. A pair of large, luminous eyes appeared, watching her intently. Her breath hitched. The forest had not only been resisting the machines, it was fighting back. A large creature, its body camouflaged by the dim light, took one careful step forward. The rustling ceased. The creature was moving so slowly that she could hear her own breath as the only sound in the world. But she could feel its presence. She stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the creature's eyes. The air grew thick. The hum of the machines seemed to fade into the background, overtaken by the presence of something much older, much more powerful. The forest had spoken, and now it was responding. As she stared at the creature, a sudden understanding swept over her. The wildlife wasn't just retreating, it was regrouping, evolving. The frogs, the birds, they weren't simply hiding from the machines. They were preparing, adapting. The forest wasn't dying, it was shifting. With one last glance at the enormous, shadowy figure before her, she turned and retreated back into the woods, her footsteps now quick, urgent. The forest was not lost, not yet. It was simply waiting, preparing for something more. And then, as she stepped back into the thick trees, the rustling began, again stronger now, louder. The frogs, the birds, even the fox, the entire forest had begun to move. The machines would not win. Not today, not ever. And somewhere deep within the trees, it was a strange sound, a warning, but also a promise. The forest would not be tamed. The story ends here, leaving a sense of unresolved tension, but also a deep, emotional connection to the forest and its creatures. The machines may encroach, but they will not silence the natural world without a fight. The air was thick with the weight of silence, and yet the silence wasn't empty. It was as though the entire forest, every leaf and root, was holding its breath, waiting for something. She had barely made it past the first line of trees when she heard it like a ripple across the earth, distant yet unmistakable. The faintest vibration, an unnatural hum, still lingered, but it was different now. The machines were not advancing any further. She could feel it in the air. The forest had spoken. The forest had drawn a line. The trees around her felt taller, more imposing, as if they had grown in the moments since she'd stood by the concrete scar. The underbrush rustled softly, as though the forest was settling, adjusting to whatever had just transpired. She took a deep breath, tasting the earth on the air, trying to calm the beating of her heart. Her mind was racing. The figure she had seen in the shadows, what had it been? Some ancient force, long forgotten by the world of men, or perhaps just a manifestation of the wilderness itself, a reminder of what the forest had always been. The frog's call still echoed in her mind, but there was something else buried beneath it, a deeper tone that resonated through her chest. She glanced over her shoulder, toward the path she had just left behind. The hum of machines seemed to have died, replaced by the sounds of nature returning to life. The frogs, the birds, even the low growl of a distant wolf. It was as if the animals had been waiting for a sign, a call to arms, and now that they had it, they were rising in unison. But the figure, the shadow in the underbrush, remained with her. It hadn't moved. She didn't know if it was still watching her, but somehow she felt its presence in the thickening woods. She shook her head, clearing her thoughts. She couldn't be distracted. The forest had its own rhythm, its own language. If she was to understand it, she had to listen. She moved forward again, slowly, this time keeping her eyes trained on the ground beneath her feet. The vibrations from the machines had left an imprint in the earth-deep tracks, where their heavy tires had once rolled, scarring the land. The grass had started to grow over them again, the earth slowly reclaiming its territory. The concrete scar, once so invasive, now looked like a foreign object, something that didn't belong. It felt wrong. She took a step closer, her fingers brushing against the bark of a nearby tree. It was ancient, its roots tangled deep within the earth. She closed her eyes, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the tree was speaking to her, whispering something deep and old, something that the forest had always known. The hum was fading, but the memory of it, that strange vibration beneath her feet, lingered. Something was different. Then, the ground shifted beneath her. It wasn't a large shift, but enough to make her stumble. She caught herself against the tree, looking down. The earth had cracked. Not violently, but enough to reveal something beneath something buried, hidden for a long time. Her breath caught in her throat as she knelt down, brushing away the soil and leaves. It was metal, a piece of the machine embedded deep in the earth. She dug faster now, the urgency growing with each motion. Her fingers scraped the cool, smooth surface of what seemed to be an old, rusted hatch. It had been here for years, decades maybe. She could see the faint markings on it now, faded and worn, but unmistakable. A chill ran down her spine as she realized what she was holding. This wasn't just a piece of the machines that had been creeping into the forest. This was something older, something buried long before the concrete scars and the mechanical hum. A deep rumble came from the forest, a sound that seemed to vibrate within her bones. Her heart skipped a beat as the trees around her swayed, as if the land itself was responding to the touch of the metal. The rusted hatch, half buried in the soil, pulsed faintly, almost as if it were alive, calling to something beneath the surface. She couldn't explain it. She didn't know how to, but instinct told her that whatever lay beneath this place was no accident. The forest had been hiding something, a force that had been waiting for the right moment to awaken. Another low growl echoed through the trees, closer now. The wolf, perhaps, or something else. The forest was shifting, realigning itself, as if it were preparing for something inevitable. Her mind raced. What had the machines disturbed? What had they uncovered? Her hands were trembling as she pulled at the hatch, feeling it shift, resisting the weight of years of earth piled on top of it. Slowly, reluctantly, it gave way. The earth sighed, as if releasing a breath it had been holding for centuries. The hatch opened with a low, metallic groan, revealing a dark, narrow shaft leading deep underground. A heavy, pungent air rose from the depths, a mixture of wet earth, decay, and something older. She hesitated, the weight of the decision hanging heavy on her. What was she about to uncover? Was it a secret long buried, or had it been waiting for the machines to come and awaken it? A sharp, sudden cry broke through the tension, a hawk's call, piercing the stillness. She looked up, and in the distance, she saw it hovering high above the trees, its sharp eyes scanning the landscape. It was the kestrel. The bird had returned, soaring above the trees like a silent sentinel. It had been watching, waiting. She turned back to the hatch, the sense of urgency pushing her forward. Whatever this was, it wasn't something that could be ignored. It was something the forest had known long before the first machine had dared to tread on its soil. Without another thought, she lowered herself into the shaft, the darkness swallowing her whole as the hatch creaked shut behind her. The weight of the forest pressed in around her, but she was no longer alone. The creatures, the birds, the frogs, the fox, they were with her. The forest had made its choice, and now they would face whatever lay ahead together. In the deep silence of the earth, the ground trembled once more, and the true nature of the forest's power was about to be revealed. The story ends with the protagonist descending into the darkness, the forest's secrets just beginning to unfold. The reader is left with a sense of mystery and tension, unsure of what lies beneath the earth, but certain that the forest is far from surrendering. The animals, too, are part of the fight, signaling a deeper connection between the natural world and the ancient forces hidden within it. The darkness swallowed her whole as she descended deeper into the shaft, the cool air thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient, like the very bones of the land had been disturbed. Her fingers traced the walls as she moved, feeling the rough, uneven stone beneath her hands. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading her deeper into the earth. The further she went, the more she felt the weight of the forest above her, like it was holding its breath, waiting. Her heart hammered in her chest, the only sound besides the faint echo of her own movements. She had no idea what she was about to find, only that the forest had brought her here for a reason. The animals, the birds, the frogs, the creatures of the woods, they had been trying to tell her something. And now, in the depths of the earth, she was about to discover what. Suddenly, the air grew colder. The walls around her felt slick with moisture, and the floor beneath her boots became uneven, jagged. She stumbled, but caught herself, taking a slow, steadying breath. Her eyes strained to see in the pitch black, but there was no light, not yet. The only illumination came from the faint, distant glow of something deeper in the tunnel, a low, flickering light. She followed it, her every step resonating through the earth, each movement more deliberate than the last. The tunnel narrowed further, and soon she could hear a faint humming, again the same hum she had felt when she first encountered the machines. But now it was different. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't foreign, it was natural. An organic hum, almost like the vibrations of a living creature deep in the earth, resonating through the very bones of the land. Her skin prickled with a strange mixture of fear and awe, and then, as if by instinct, she stopped. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber, and there, in the center, something gleamed, a massive stone structure, covered in vines and roots, twisting around it like the arms of the earth itself. It was ancient, impossibly so. The stone was dark, worn smooth by time, and etched with symbols that seemed to pulse with an eerie light, a soft, rhythmic pulse. It felt like a heartbeat, like the very heart of the forest was beating beneath her feet. She took a step forward, and in that moment, she understood. This wasn't just a machine, this was a part of the forest, a part of the land itself. It had been buried, hidden away, waiting for the right moment to resurface. The machines, the concrete scars, the noise, they had all been nothing but a distraction. They were only the beginning of something much older, much more powerful. The force that had once ruled the earth, that had once shaped the land, was awakening. As she moved closer, the ground beneath her feet shifted. The pulse of energy grew stronger, the air vibrating with power. The walls of the chamber seemed to hum in response, and the earth groaned, deep and low, as if protesting the disturbance. Her breath caught as the stone before her began to move. Slowly, the earth around the massive structure seemed to come alive, roots, writhing, pulling at the stone, lifting it from its resting place. She stepped back, eyes wide, as the stone structure rose, revealing an opening at its base. From within the opening, a faint light spilled out, casting long, eerie shadows across the chamber. It was a soft, glowing blue cold, almost ethereal. She knew, deep in her gut, that this was no ordinary light. It was the pulse of something ancient, something that had been hidden for centuries. The humming grew louder, and the ground trembled once more. She knew now that the forest hadn't just been fighting for its survival. It had been protecting something. The light flickered, and then just as suddenly as it had started, the pulse stopped. A silence deeper than anything she had ever known filled the chamber. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. There was something in the air now, an energy, a presence that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The earth was alive beneath her feet, and she felt it in her bones. Something, or someone, was watching her from the depths of that glowing light. And then, The ground beneath her shifted again. This time, it wasn't the stone that moved. The roots, the vines, the earth itself seemed to stretch toward her. The chamber was alive, moving, waking from a long, deep slumber. From the center of the glowing light, something began to emerge, a figure. Dark and cloaked in shadows, its outline flickering with the same ethereal glow. It was tall, towering over her, its form shifting and changing, like smoke rising from the earth. The light it emanated was not of this world. It hovered before her, its form indistinct, yet strangely familiar. There was something about it that made her heart race, a connection that she couldn't explain. It was the forest, but it was more than that. It was the land itself, the very spirit of nature, untamed and immense. The figure stretched toward her, the energy in the air thickening, suffocating. The trees above, the animals, the birds, they were all silent now, holding their breath. Even the frogs had stopped croaking, their chorus silenced by the presence in the chamber. A sharp cry, the piercing call of the kestrel, echoed from above, distinct but unmistakable. The forest was watching, waiting. The balance had shifted. The figure reached out. She felt her pulse quicken, fear and awe mixing in her veins. Was this the force she had felt when the machines first arrived? Was this the power of the earth, the power of the forest that had been disturbed? She took a step back, her instincts screaming at her to leave, to run, but something within her held her in place. The forest had led her here for a reason, and she knew that this was not a moment of escape. It was a moment of understanding. The figure's glowing eyes locked onto hers, and in that instant, she understood. The forest wasn't just fighting for survival. It was fighting for something far greater, something that would reshape everything, something that had been hidden for centuries. And now, the earth would reclaim what was its own. The final twist leaves the protagonist facing an ancient, powerful force that is both a part of the forest and something beyond it, something that transcends the human world. As the light and energy build to an overwhelming climax, the reader is left with a sense of mystery and awe, unsure of what will come next, but certain that the earth is not done fighting. The forest is more than just trees and animals. It is an ancient force that cannot be silenced.